Sir, please help my mother. Hell's Angel defeats 5 men. Minutes later, 100 Hell's Angel arrive. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Main Street as Sarah pushed her shopping cart through the automatic doors of Thompson's grocery. Her daughter Emma skipped beside her, clutching her worn teddy bear named Mr. Snuggles. The parking lot was nearly empty, typical for a Wednesday afternoon in their small town. Sarah checked her watch nervously. She'd timed their shopping carefully to avoid the usual crowds, especially since Dale had started showing up unexpectedly around town. Her hands trembled slightly as she loaded the grocery bags into their old sedan. "Mommy, can Mr. Snuggles help?" Emma asked, holding up her teddy bear with both hands. Sarah managed a warm smile. "Thank you, sweetie, but Mr. Snuggles should stay clean. Why don't you hold on to him for me?" The sound of heavy footsteps made Sarah's heart skip a beat. 5 men approached from behind the nearby pickup truck, their faces wearing unfriendly smirks. She recognized 2 of them as Dale's drinking buddies. "Well, look who we found," the tallest one said, crossing his arms. "Dale's been looking for you, Sarah?" Sarah instinctively pulled Emma closer. "Please, I'm just getting groceries. We need to get home." "Funny how you're never home when Dale comes around," another man sneered, moving to block her car door. "Maybe you need a reminder about respecting your husband." The men formed a loose circle around Sarah and Emma. One of them knocked the remaining grocery bag from Sarah's hands, sending cans rolling across the asphalt. Emma whimpered, squeezing Mr. Snuggles tighter. "Leave us alone," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady. "There are people watching." "Nobody's watching," the tall one replied, taking a step closer. "And even if they were, this is family business. Right, boys?" Sarah's legs felt weak, but she stood her ground, positioning herself between the men and Emma. Her daughter's small hand clutched the back of her shirt. Emma's eyes darted around frantically until they landed on something across the street. Through gaps between the men, she spotted a tall figure in a leather jacket leaning against a motorcycle. Without warning, she broke free from her mother's grip. "Emma, wait!" Sarah called out, her voice tight with panic. Emma darted between the men, who were too surprised to stop her. She ran across the empty street, her little legs carrying her as fast as they could. The biker straightened up as she approached, his imposing frame casting a long shadow. Despite his rough appearance, the tattoos visible on his neck, the Hell's Angels patch on his jacket, Emma didn't hesitate. She tugged at his jacket with one small hand, still holding Mr. Snuggles with the other. "Sir, please help my mother," she pleaded, tears welling in her eyes. The biker, Max, looked down at Emma, then across the street where the 5 men still surrounded Sarah. His expression hardened as he watched one of them grab Sarah's arm roughly. He'd been trying to stay out of trouble, to leave his violent past behind. But something in Emma's innocent plea cut through his carefully constructed walls. Max straightened to his full height, his boots heavy on the pavement as he started across the street. The men noticed him approaching, their attention shifting from Sarah to the tattooed giant moving purposefully toward them. Their confident sneers faltered as they recognized the patch on his jacket. His face set in grim determination, Max stepped forward, his fists clenched at his sides. The 5 men exchanged uncertain glances, suddenly less sure of themselves as the Hell's Angel prepared to act. "Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today. Now back to the story." The 5 men turned as Max's heavy boots scraped against the pavement. His weathered leather jacket creaked as he moved, the faded Hell's Angels patch catching the afternoon sun. The tallest of the group, a burly man with a shaved head, sneered and stepped forward. "Mind your own business, old man," he growled, cracking his knuckles. Max's face remained calm, but his eyes hardened. Years of military training and street fights had taught him to read situations quickly. These weren't just ordinary troublemakers. They were predators who had picked their target carefully. "The lady and her daughter are my business now," Max said, his voice low and steady. He planted his feet shoulder-width apart, ready for what would come next. Two of the men circled to his sides while the others spread out in front. Max felt a familiar tightness in his chest, the calm before a storm. He hadn't wanted to fight today, but seeing Emma's frightened face and Sarah's trembling hands had awakened something in him. The first punch came fast, but Max was faster. He stepped inside the swing, grabbed the man's arm, and used his momentum to throw him into one of his friends. Both crashed to the ground in a tangle of limbs. The third man rushed forward with a wild haymaker. Max blocked it easily and countered with a swift strike to the ribs. The impact made a dull thud, and the man doubled over, gasping for air. "Stay down," Max warned, but they weren't listening. The remaining two attacked together. Max ducked under a wild swing and drove his shoulder into the closest attacker's chest, lifting him off his feet. As the man fell backward, Max spun around, blocking a punch from the last opponent. His counterstrike was precise, a short, sharp jab that sent the man staggering. The whole thing lasted less than a minute. 5 men lay scattered on the ground, groaning and clutching various injuries. Max hadn't even broken a sweat. A small crowd had gathered, watching in stunned silence. Some had their phones out, recording everything. Max ignored them all and turned to Sarah, who stood frozen, her grocery bags scattered across the pavement. "Are you all right, ma'am?" he asked, his voice gentler now. He extended his hand to help her up, noticing how she flinched slightly before accepting it. Sarah's hand trembled in his as she stood. Yes. Thank you," she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. Emma darted forward from where she'd been watching, her eyes wide with wonder. She wrapped her small arms around Max's leg, pressing her face against his jeans. "You saved us," she said, looking up at him with complete trust. Max felt something twist in his chest. It had been a long time since anyone had looked at him that way, like he was a hero instead of someone to fear. He patted Emma's head awkwardly, not used to such open affection. "Let's get your groceries," he said, bending down to help gather the scattered items. As he picked up a carton of milk, he noticed Sarah watching him, her expression a mix of gratitude and uncertainty. The 5 men were already scrambling to their feet, backing away with mumbled threats and wounded pride. Max kept one eye on them as he helped Sarah collect her things, making sure they didn't try anything else. Emma stayed close to his side, clutching her stuffed animal and beaming up at him as if he'd just performed a miracle instead of beating up 5 men in a parking lot. Her innocent trust made his heart ache with a feeling he couldn't quite name. The 5 men stumbled away, their faces red with embarrassment and pain. A small crowd had gathered outside the grocery store, whispering and pointing. Some pulled out their phones to record what was happening. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the cracked parking lot pavement. Max rolled his shoulders and took a deep breath. His knuckles stung, but he'd been careful not to hurt the men too badly, just enough to make them think twice about bothering Sarah and Emma again. He glanced at the mother and daughter, who stood close together near the store entrance. Emma clutched her stuffed rabbit tighter, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and wonder. "You okay?" Max asked Sarah in his gravelly voice. She nodded, pulling Emma closer. "Thank you," Sarah whispered. Her hands were shaking as she tried to gather her scattered grocery bags. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't." Max bent down to help her, his weathered hands collecting the spilled items. "Don't mention it." He handed her a can of soup that had rolled near his boot. The crowd pressed closer, their murmurs growing louder. Max recognized the looks they were giving him, a mix of gratitude and unease. He'd seen those looks before, people not quite sure what to make of a man like him. His leather jacket with its old patch marks and his tattooed arms usually had that effect. "I should go," Max said, taking a step back. Best to leave before things got complicated. He'd done what needed doing, and that was enough. But before he could turn away, a low rumble filled the air. At first it was just a distant growl, like far-off thunder. Then it grew louder, building into a familiar roar that made Max's stomach tighten. He knew that sound, had lived with it for years. Motorcycles. Lots of them. The crowd's whispers turned to gasps as the first bikes appeared at the end of the street. They came in pairs, then groups of 4, then too many to count. The thunder of engines echoed off the buildings as bike after bike rolled into the town square. Black leather, chrome, and steel filled every available space. Max stood very still, his jaw clenched. Over 100 Hells Angels had just rolled into this quiet town. He recognized many of the faces, old friends, old enemies, brothers he'd fought beside, and some he'd fought against. Word traveled fast in the club, and somehow they'd heard about the fight. Sarah grabbed Emma's hand and pulled her daughter behind her. The crowd began to back away, creating a wide circle around Max and the arriving bikers. The air felt electric with tension. The bikes went quiet one by one, their riders watching Max with unreadable expressions. Some nodded in recognition. Others just stared. The silence that followed the engine's roar was deafening. Max felt the weight of his old life pressing down on him. He'd walked away from the club years ago, trying to leave the violence behind. But now here they were, his past and present colliding in this small-town parking lot. He could feel Sarah and Emma's eyes on his back, along with the stares of everyone else. The choice lay before him like a fork in the road. He could walk away now, disappear before things got messy. Or he could stay and face whatever came next, knowing it might drag him back into a world he'd fought so hard to leave behind. The rumble of engines filled the small town square as motorcycle after motorcycle rolled in, their chrome gleaming under the afternoon sun. The sight of over 100 Hells Angels, with their leather cuts and patches, sent a wave of unease through the gathered crowd. Some townspeople hurried away, while others pressed themselves against storefronts, watching with nervous curiosity. Max stood his ground, his jaw tight as familiar faces surrounded him. Sarah instinctively pulled Emma closer, her arms wrapping protectively around her daughter. The little girl buried her face in her mother's side, but kept peeking out at Max, still seeing him as their protector despite the intimidating scene unfolding around them. "Looks like you still got it, brother," a deep voice called out. Through the sea of bikers emerged Bear, a giant of a man with gray-streaked beard and weathered leather vest. He was the chapter president, and his presence commanded respect. "Word travels fast when one of our own handles business." Max shifted his weight, uncomfortable with the attention. "I'm not one of your own anymore, Bear. You know that." "Once a brother, always a brother," Bear replied, placing a heavy hand on Max's shoulder. "These boys," he gestured to the 5 men who were still nursing their wounds nearby, "needed to learn some respect. You taught them well." Sarah watched the exchange with growing uncertainty. The man who had come to their rescue minutes ago suddenly seemed different, more dangerous, more complex. She could see the respect the other bikers had for him, but it made her question everything. Was he really trying to help them, or was this all part of something bigger? The 5 troublemakers had long since disappeared, leaving only the bikers and the remaining townspeople in an uncomfortable standoff. The air was thick with tension as everyone waited to see what would happen next. "We got your back," Bear continued, his voice carrying across the square. Anytime you need us, we're here. Other bikers nodded in agreement, their leather cuts creaking as they moved. Max's eyes found Sarah's across the crowd. He saw the fear there, the doubt, and it hit him hard. He'd been trying to leave his old life behind, to find peace away from the violence and brotherhood that had defined him for so long. But now here it all was, crashing back into his world because he'd chosen to help a little girl and her mother. I appreciate the support, Max said carefully. But this isn't about the club. This was about doing what's right. Bear studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Maybe so, but you're still family, whether you wear the cut or not. He turned to address the other riders. Mount up, brothers. Our boy here knows where to find us if he needs us. The bikers began to move, their boots scraping against the pavement as they returned to their motorcycles. But they all looked to Max first, waiting for some sign, some acknowledgement. He could feel the weight of their expectations, their loyalty, and their understanding. They were offering him a way back in, a return to the life he'd left behind. Max stood there, caught between two worlds. Behind him was Sarah, a woman who needed protection, and Emma, a little girl who had trusted him without hesitation. Before him was his old family, the brotherhood that had been his whole life for so many years. The decision to stay or go suddenly felt much heavier than just choosing a location. It was about choosing who he wanted to be. The rumble of motorcycle engines gradually died down as the Hells Angels settled into the town square. Max stood his ground, his weathered boots planted firmly on the cracked pavement. The leather-clad bikers formed a loose circle around him, their presence both familiar and unsettling. Sarah clutched Emma's hand tighter, her knuckles white with tension. The little girl, however, showed no fear. She watched the scene with wide, curious eyes, still holding on to her stuffed rabbit. It's okay, Max said softly, turning to Sarah. His voice was gentle, a stark contrast to the rough exterior he presented. Let's talk over there. He gestured to a quiet corner near the grocery store's entrance, away from the crowd. Sarah hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Emma skipped alongside them, seemingly unaffected by the heavy atmosphere. The three of them moved to the side, while the angels maintained a respectful distance. Thank you, Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper, for what you did back there. Those men... She trailed off, a shadow crossing her face. Max's expression softened as he watched Emma playing with her rabbit's floppy ears. No need to thank me. I couldn't just stand by. But all these people... Sarah glanced nervously at the bikers. Some were lighting cigarettes, others leaning against their motorcycles, talking in low voices. I don't want to bring trouble to Emma. Max ran a hand through his graying hair. The angels, they're my past. But they're not all bad. They came because they heard one of their own was in trouble. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I left that life behind, but some bonds don't break easily. Emma looked up at Max, her innocent eyes meeting his tired ones. Are they your friends? She asked simply. A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Something like that, kid. Sarah wrapped her arms around herself, a protective gesture. I've learned to be careful about who I trust, she admitted. Emma's all I have. I understand, Max said, his voice carrying the weight of experience. But I want you to know something. He looked directly at Sarah, his gaze steady and sincere. As long as I'm here, nobody's going to hurt either of you. You have my word on that. Emma reached out and touched Max's leather jacket. Mom, he's like a superhero, she said with complete conviction. Sarah couldn't help but laugh softly, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. Emma has good instincts about people, she said. Better than mine, sometimes. Smart kid, Max replied, giving Emma a gentle pat on the head. He turned his attention back to Sarah. I know it's hard to trust, especially after what you've been through, but I'm not asking for trust right away. Just know that I'll be around if you need me. Sarah nodded slowly, understanding the weight of his words. Thank you, Max. From where they stood, Max could see the angels settling into the town square. Some were already chatting with curious locals, breaking the initial tension. Others kept watch, old habits dying hard. It was a familiar sight, one that reminded him of countless gatherings in countless towns. He watched them with mixed emotions, knowing that no matter how far he rode or how much he changed, this part of his life would always be there. The angels were like a shadow that both protected and followed him, a reminder of who he used to be and who he was trying to become. Emma tugged at his jacket again, pulling him from his thoughts. Will you stay? She asked, hope shining in her eyes. Before Max could answer, the rumble of distant motorcycles caught his attention. He turned his head toward the sound, watching as more riders appeared on the horizon. Sarah sat at her kitchen table, hands wrapped around a cooling mug of tea. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the window, and Emma's soft humming drifted down from upstairs, where she played with her dolls. The events from earlier kept replaying in her mind. The threatening men, the mysterious biker, and then the arrival of all those motorcycles. Her fingers traced the small chip in her favorite blue mug, a familiar comfort as her thoughts wandered. Max had seemed so different from what she'd expected. Despite his intimidating appearance, there had been kindness in his eyes when he helped her up. But could she trust that kindness? She'd made that mistake before. The sharp knock at the front door made her jump, tea sloshing over the rim of her mug. Sarah's heart stopped when she heard the all-too-familiar voice. Sarah, open this door right now. Dale. Her hands began to shake as she set down her mug. She hadn't heard his voice in weeks, not since she'd finally gathered the courage to leave. Mommy? Emma called from upstairs, worry clear in her small voice. Stay in your room, sweetie, Sarah called back, trying to keep her voice steady. Just keep playing. Another loud knock rattled the door. I know you're in there, Sarah. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Sarah stood, squaring her shoulders. She'd spent too many years cowering from that voice. With trembling fingers, she opened the door, but kept the chain lock fastened. Dale's face appeared in the gap, his features twisted in that familiar scowl. Take this chain off. We need to talk. No, Dale. Whatever you have to say, you can say it through the door. His expression darkened. Is this how it's going to be? After everything I've done for you and Emma? He pressed against the door, making the chain creak. You have responsibilities. A wife's place is with her husband. Ex-husband, Sarah corrected, surprised by the strength in her voice. We're divorced, Dale. You need to accept that. Accept it? He barked out a harsh laugh. I've accepted nothing. You think you can just walk away? Start over? Maybe with that biker trash I heard about? Sarah's fingers tightened on the doorframe. How I live my life isn't your concern anymore. Everything you do is my concern. Dale's fist slammed against the doorframe, making Sarah flinch. You're embarrassing me in front of the whole town, running around with criminals. What kind of example are you setting for our daughter? My daughter, Sarah said firmly. And I'm setting the example that it's okay to stand up for yourself. That it's okay to leave when someone hurts you. Dale's face reddened. You ungrateful. He caught himself, forcing a cold smile. Fine. Have it your way for now. But this isn't over, Sarah. Not by a long shot. He turned and stormed down the porch steps. Sarah watched through the window as he got into his truck, tires spraying gravel as he pulled away. Her legs felt weak, and she slumped against the wall, heart pounding. Upstairs, she could hear Emma's door creaking open. "Mommy?" came the small voice from the top of the stairs. Sarah took a deep breath, steadying herself. "It's okay, baby. Everything's okay." But as she climbed the stairs to comfort her daughter, Sarah knew it wasn't okay. Dale's words echoed in her mind. This isn't over, and knowing Dale, she believed him. The morning sun cast long shadows across Main Street as Sarah waited outside the local diner. Her hands trembled slightly as she wrapped them around her coffee cup, seeking warmth despite the mild spring weather. Max's motorcycle rumbled into view, and she watched him park and dismount with surprising grace for such a big man. "Thanks for meeting me," Sarah said softly as Max settled into the bench beside her. Her eyes darted around, checking if anyone was watching them. Max noticed her nervous glances. "Everything okay?" His voice was gentle, a stark contrast to his intimidating appearance. Sarah stared into her coffee, gathering courage. "Dale showed up at my house last night." She spoke barely above a whisper, but Max caught every word. His jaw tightened, and his hands clenched into fists. "Did he hurt you?" Max asked, his voice rough with concern. "No." Sarah shook her head. "But he made threats, said he'd be back." She tried to sound brave, but her voice cracked. "He wants me and Emma to come home with him." Max shifted on the bench, turning to face her fully. "I can help. Let me keep watch. Make sure he doesn't—" "No." Sarah cut him off firmly, straightening her shoulders. "I don't need protection. I've handled Dale for years. I can handle him now." But even as she spoke, her hands shook so badly she had to set down her coffee. "Sarah." Max's voice was soft with understanding. "You don't have to handle this alone anymore." "You don't understand," she insisted, wrapping her arms around herself. "I got myself into this mess. I stayed too long. I let Emma see things no child should see." Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them back. "It's my responsibility to fix it." Max watched her carefully, noting the way she held herself rigid, like she might shatter if she relaxed even slightly. He recognized the look in her eyes. He'd seen it in his own reflection countless times, the look of someone carrying too much weight alone. "Sometimes being strong means letting others help," he said quietly. Sarah's facade cracked just slightly. She pressed her lips together, fighting back emotions she'd kept buried for years. "I trusted him once," she whispered. "I trusted him, and he—" She couldn't finish. Max remained silent, giving her space to find her words. "Every time I thought about leaving, he'd do something kind. Buy Emma a new toy. Make my favorite dinner." Sarah's voice grew distant. "Then the next day, he'd—" She wrapped her arms tighter around herself. "I just kept thinking if I tried harder, loved him more." "That wasn't your fault," Max said firmly. Sarah shook her head, unconvinced. "I should have been stronger. Should have left sooner." Her voice trembled. Emma deserved better. Max watched as Sarah struggled to maintain her composure, seeing the years of pain and guilt she carried. Though she sat straight-backed and insisted she needed no help, her eyes told a different story, one of exhaustion and fear, of a woman who had been fighting alone for far too long. "I appreciate your concern," Sarah said, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "But really, I'll be fine." She stood up quickly, gathering her purse. "I should get to work." Max remained seated, his concern growing as he watched her hurried departure. Her steps were steady, her head held high, but he could see the weight of her burden in every movement she made. The old warehouse on the edge of town buzzed with activity. Dozens of motorcycles lined the gravel parking lot, their chrome gleaming under the afternoon sun. Inside, leather-clad figures gathered in small groups, their voices echoing off the high metal ceiling. Max stood in the center of the room, arms crossed over his chest. The familiar smell of motor oil and leather brought back memories he'd tried hard to forget. Bear, the chapter president, sat on a wooden crate, his gray beard touching his chest as he looked up at Max. "You know how this works," Bear said, his voice gravelly but kind. "Can't have it both ways, brother. Either you're in or you're out." Max shifted his weight, feeling the eyes of his former brothers on him. "I made my choice when I left." "Then why are we still here?" someone called from the back. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Bear raised his hand, silencing the group. "We came because you needed us. That's what brotherhood means." He stood up, his massive frame casting a shadow. "But this thing with the woman and her kid, it's complicated. We can't stick around forever." "I'm not asking you to," Max said firmly. The words tasted bitter in his mouth. These men had been his family for years, but now everything felt different. Snake, a lean rider with tattoos covering his neck, stepped forward. "Walk away, Max. Let the local cops handle it. This ain't our business." "It became my business when that little girl asked for help," Max replied, remembering Emma's frightened eyes. "I can't just leave them." The warehouse fell silent. Bear walked over to Max, placing a heavy hand on his shoulder. "You always had a soft heart, even when you tried to hide it. That's why you left us in the first place." Max didn't deny it. The violence, the constant fighting, it had eaten away at him until he couldn't recognize himself anymore. "If you stay," Bear continued, "you're on your own. We can't keep coming back every time there's trouble. You understand?" The weight of the decision pressed down on Max's shoulders. He thought about Sarah's strength, about Emma's trust. They needed someone to stand between them and the darkness that threatened their peace. "I understand," Max said, his voice steady. "But I have to do this." Bear nodded slowly, respect flickering in his eyes. "Then this is goodbye, brother. For real this time." One by one, the riders approached Max. Some offered handshakes, others hugged him. Each farewell felt like closing a chapter of his life. Snake was the last to approach. "You're making a mistake," Snake warned, "but I hope you prove me wrong." Max watched as his former brothers filed out of the warehouse. The rumble of engines grew louder, then faded as they rode away. He remained standing in the empty space, dust motes dancing in the sunlight, streaming through dirty windows. The decision was made. He would face whatever came next, not as a Hell's Angel, but as the man he needed to become. For Sarah, for Emma, for himself. Bear's motorcycle was the last to start up. Through the open warehouse door, their eyes met one final time. Bear gave a slight nod, then rode away, leaving Max alone with his choice and the echo of engines fading into the distance. Sarah stood at her kitchen window, watching Emma play in their small backyard. The morning sun painted everything in soft golden light, and for a moment, she could almost pretend everything was normal. Emma's laughter floated through the open window as she chased butterflies between the flower beds Sarah had planted last spring. "Look, Mommy," Emma called out, holding up a dandelion. "I made a wish." Sarah smiled, her heart warming at her daughter's innocent joy. "What did you wish for, sweetie?" Before Emma could answer, a car door slammed shut in front of their house. Sarah's stomach dropped as she recognized Dale's silver sedan. But this time, he wasn't alone. A man in an expensive suit stepped out of the passenger side, carrying a leather briefcase. "Emma, come inside now," Sarah called, trying to keep her voice steady. Emma looked up, her smile fading as she sensed her mother's tension. The doorbell rang just as Emma made it inside. Sarah took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and opened the door. "Sarah," Dale said, his voice dripping with fake politeness. "We need to talk." The man in the suit stepped forward. "Mrs. Walker, I'm James Morton from Morton & Associates. I represent Mr. Walker in this matter." Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she gripped the doorframe. "What matter?" "May we come in?" the lawyer asked, but Dale was already pushing past her into the house. Emma pressed against Sarah's side, wrapping her small arms around her mother's waist. Sarah placed a protective hand on her daughter's shoulder. "I've been more than patient," Dale said, pacing their small living room. "But enough is enough. You're coming home with me, or we'll do this the hard way." The lawyer cleared his throat. "What my client means is that we're prepared to file for full custody of Emma if necessary. Mr. Walker has documentation of your unstable behavior." Sarah's blood ran cold. "Unstable behavior? Running away with our daughter? Associating with known criminals?" Dale listed off, his eyes glinting with malice. "That biker gang you've been hanging around? Not a good look for a mother, Sarah." "They helped us," Emma spoke up, her voice small but determined. "The nice man stopped those bad people from hurting Mommy." Dale's face darkened. "Emma, go to your room. The adults need to talk." "She stays with me," Sarah said firmly, though her heart was racing. The lawyer pulled some papers from his briefcase. "We can make this easy. Sign these papers agreeing to return home, and we can avoid a messy court battle that could result in you losing Emma completely." Sarah felt the walls closing in. The threat of losing Emma made her dizzy with fear. But as she looked down at her daughter's trusting face, something inside her strengthened. "No," she said, surprising herself with how steady her voice sounded. "I won't sign anything. And if you want to take this to court, then do it. But I'm not going back to that house, and I'm not letting you control us anymore." Dale's face twisted with anger. "You really want to do this the hard way? Fine. You'll regret this, Sarah. I promise you that." The lawyer handed her his card. "Think about it, Mrs. Walker. You have 24 hours before we file the paperwork." After they left, Sarah sank onto the couch, her hands shaking. Emma climbed into her lap, wrapping her small arms around her mother's neck. "Don't worry, Mommy," Emma whispered. "We're stronger together." Sarah held her daughter close, breathing in the sweet smell of her hair. She might be scared, but she wasn't going to let fear rule her life anymore. She would fight for their freedom, no matter what it took. Max stood in the shadow of the general store's awning, his muscles tense as he watched Sarah face Dale in the dusty parking lot. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, casting harsh shadows across Dale's twisted features. Emma clung to her mother's leg, half hidden behind Sarah's flowing summer dress. "You can't keep doing this, Dale," Sarah said, her voice steadier than Max had expected. "You need to leave us alone." Dale's face reddened, and he took a menacing step forward. "I told you before, you don't get to make that decision. You're my wife." "Ex-wife," Sarah corrected him, though her voice wavered slightly. "The papers were finalized 3 months ago." Max noticed how Dale's hands clenched into fists at his sides. The man's expensive suit couldn't hide the rage simmering beneath the surface. Emma whimpered, and that small sound made something shift inside Max's chest. He pushed away from the wall and walked toward them, his boots crunching on the gravel. Dale's attention snapped to him immediately. "This is a private conversation," Dale sneered, drawing himself up to his full height. "It doesn't concern you." Max kept his voice level, remembering his promise to himself not to resort to violence. "It became my concern when you started threatening them in public." "Threatening?" Dale laughed, but there was no humor in it. I'm having a discussion with my family. They're not your family anymore, Max said simply, positioning himself slightly in front of Sarah and Emma. Sarah made that clear, and Emma doesn't need to see you acting like this. Dale's lawyer, a nervous-looking man in an ill-fitting suit, tugged at Dale's sleeve. Perhaps we should continue this another time, he suggested quietly. But Dale shrugged him off, taking another step toward Max. You think because you've got a bunch of bikers backing you up, you can tell me what to do? This isn't your business. Max remained perfectly still, his voice calm but firm. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm asking you to think about what's best for Emma. Look at her. She's terrified. Is this really how you want her to remember you? Dale's gaze flickered to Emma, and for a moment, something like shame crossed his face. The little girl had pressed her face into her mother's dress, shoulders shaking. The courts will hear about this, Dale threatened, but he'd taken a step back. You can't keep my daughter from me. Nobody's keeping her from you, Sarah spoke up, her voice stronger now. But you need to handle this properly, through the right channels, not by showing up and trying to intimidate us. Max nodded, still maintaining his protective stance. If you want to discuss visitation, do it through your lawyer, but right now, you need to leave. Dale looked between them, his jaw working as he fought with his anger. Finally, he straightened his tie and took another step back. This isn't over, he said, but the words lacked their earlier venom. Yes, it is, Max replied quietly. For today, at least. The lawyer placed a hand on Dale's shoulder, and this time Dale allowed himself to be led away. They watched as he climbed into his expensive car, the engine roaring to life with unnecessary force. As the car pulled away, Sarah let out a shaky breath. Emma finally looked up, her small face tear-stained but relieved. Max turned to them, noting how Sarah's hands trembled despite her brave front. Thank you, she whispered, meeting his eyes. For handling it the way you did. The morning sun filtered through the curtains of Sarah's small kitchen, casting warm patterns on the worn linoleum floor. Max sat at the table, his large frame making the wooden chair seem small. His coffee had gone cold, untouched, as he stared at his calloused hands. Sarah busied herself packing Emma's lunch for school, stealing glances at the troubled man. The house was quiet, except for the distant sounds of cartoons from the living room, where Emma watched TV before school. You know, Max said, his voice barely above a whisper, I never wanted any of this to follow me here. His shoulders slumped, the weight of his words visible in his posture. Sarah paused her lunch-making and turned to face him. What do you mean? The angels, he said, running a hand through his hair. I thought I could just walk away, start fresh. He let out a heavy sigh. But it's not that simple. Nothing ever is. Sarah pulled out a chair and sat across from him. The morning light caught the fading bruise on her cheek, a reminder of Dale's last visit. Tell me, she said softly. Max's fingers traced the rim of his coffee cup. I joined them young, right after my discharge. The brotherhood, the loyalty, it felt like everything I needed. His voice cracked slightly. But the violence, it changes you. Every fight, every threat, it chips away at who you are. Sarah reached across the table, her hand stopping just short of his. Why did you stay? Because they became my family, Max admitted, his eyes meeting hers. When you've got nothing else, that means everything. But one night... He swallowed hard. One night we were supposed to teach someone a lesson. I saw the fear in his eyes, the same fear I saw in Emma's eyes yesterday. That's when I knew I had to get out. Sarah listened, her heart aching for the pain she heard in his voice. The tough exterior she'd first seen was crumbling, revealing the wounded soul beneath. But leaving isn't just walking away, Max continued, his hands clenching into fists. The life follows you. The reputation, the expectations, they're always there. And now? He looked toward the living room, where Emma's cartoon laughter drifted in. Now I'm afraid I've brought that danger to your doorstep. Yesterday, when those men were threatening me, Sarah said quietly, you didn't fight like someone who enjoys violence. You fought like someone who knows the cost of it. Max's eyes widened slightly at her insight. We all have pasts we're trying to escape, Sarah continued, finally letting her hand rest on his. Sometimes the hardest part isn't running from them, it's accepting that they're part of who we are. Max stared at their hands, his much larger one trembling slightly under her touch. I don't want to be that person anymore, he whispered, but I don't know how to be anyone else. Sarah squeezed his hand gently. Maybe you don't have to figure it out alone. Her voice was soft but steady. The man who helped us yesterday, that's who you are now. The past doesn't have to define your future. For the first time that morning, Max's tension seemed to ease slightly. He looked at Sarah with vulnerable eyes, seeing not judgment, but understanding. In her kitchen, with the morning sun warming their hands, he felt a glimmer of hope he hadn't dared to feel in years. The evening sun cast long shadows through Sarah's kitchen window as she stirred a pot of spaghetti sauce. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for the oregano. Having Max over for dinner felt like a huge step, but Emma had begged, and Sarah couldn't deny that his presence made her feel safer. Can I help set the table? Emma asked, bouncing on her toes near the counter. Sarah smiled at her daughter's enthusiasm. Sure, sweetie. Remember, 3 plates tonight. The doorbell rang, and Emma dashed to answer it. Sarah's heart skipped a beat, but she reminded herself that it was just Max, not Dale. She heard Emma's delighted greeting, and Max's deep, gentle voice responding. Something smells amazing, Max said as he entered the kitchen, a grocery bag in his hands. His massive frame seemed to fill the small space, but he moved carefully, deliberately, like he was aware of taking up too much room. I brought garlic bread, he said, placing the bag on the counter. Store-bought, I'm afraid. I'm not much of a cook. Sarah noticed he'd traded his leather jacket for a clean blue button-down shirt. The tattoos on his arms were still visible, but somehow they seemed less intimidating now. Thank you, Sarah said, managing a small smile. That's thoughtful of you. Emma tugged at Max's sleeve. Want to see where you're sitting? I put you next to me. The first few minutes of dinner were quiet, except for the clink of forks against plates. Sarah watched as Emma chatted away to Max about her day at school, her favorite cartoons, and her stuffed animal collection. Max listened intently, nodding at all the right moments. And then Mrs. Thompson said my drawing was the best in class, Emma declared proudly. What did you draw? Max asked, his gruff voice softening when he spoke to her. A butterfly garden, with lots of flowers and a big yellow sun. Emma's face lit up. Want to see it after dinner? I'd like that very much, Max replied, and Sarah caught the genuine warmth in his smile. As they ate, the tension in Sarah's shoulders began to ease. She found herself sharing stories about Emma's early years, and Max talked about the places he'd seen during his time in the service. He carefully avoided mentions of his life with the Hells Angels, something Sarah appreciated. This sauce is incredible, Max said, helping himself to seconds. My mom used to make something similar, but I never got her recipe before she passed. I could teach you, Sarah offered, surprising herself. It's not complicated, just takes patience. I'd like that, Max said quietly, their eyes meeting briefly across the table. Emma finished her meal and bounced in her chair. Can I show Max my drawing now? Sarah nodded, watching as her daughter grabbed Max's large hand without hesitation, leading him to the refrigerator where her artwork was proudly displayed. The sight of her small hand in his made Sarah's heart twist with an unfamiliar emotion. "See? That's the butterfly garden," Emma explained, pointing at her colorful creation. "It's beautiful," Max said, crouching down to Emma's level. "You've got real talent." Emma beamed at him, her face glowing with pride and trust. In that moment, Sarah saw what her daughter had seen from the beginning, not a dangerous ex-biker, but someone who could be trusted, someone who genuinely cared. The smile Emma gave Max was pure sunshine, full of the innocent faith that only children could offer so freely. Sarah watched them, feeling something warm bloom in her chest. Hope, she realized. Hope for a future where dinners like this could become normal, where safety wasn't just a dream. The rumble of motorcycles broke the peaceful evening quiet. Sarah and Emma were just clearing the dinner table when the sound grew louder, echoing through the small neighborhood. Max tensed, his fork hovering over the last bite of apple pie. "Those are my brothers," he said quietly, pushing back his chair. The leather of his jacket creaked as he stood up. Emma rushed to the window, pressing her small hands against the glass. "Look at all the bikes!" she exclaimed, her eyes wide with wonder. Sarah moved beside her daughter, her face tight with worry. Outside, at least 20 Hell's Angels had pulled up along the street, their chrome machines gleaming under the streetlights. "I should go see what they want," Max said, his voice heavy. He caught Sarah's concerned look and tried to smile. "Don't worry, everything's fine." The screen door creaked as Max stepped onto the porch. Big Pete, one of the senior members, dismounted his Harley and walked up the path. His massive frame cast a long shadow in the evening light. "Max," Big Pete called out, spreading his arms wide. "Been looking all over for you, brother." The two men embraced, but Max's shoulders remained stiff. "What brings you all here?" "Got word of some action 2 towns over," Big Pete said, lowering his voice. "Need our best man with us, for old time's sake." Max glanced back at the house. Through the window he could see Emma waving at him, Sarah's hands resting protectively on her shoulders. "I don't know, Pete. I've got responsibilities here now." Several other riders had gathered around, their faces expectant. These were men who'd had his back countless times, who'd been there through the darkest moments of his life. "Come on, brother," another rider called out. "One ride won't kill you." Max ran a hand through his hair, feeling the weight of both worlds pulling at him. The brotherhood that had been his family for so long, and the new life he was trying to build. "Just a quick ride," Big Pete pressed. "We need you, Max. The old crew together again." Inside the house, Emma had her face pressed against the window screen. "Are you going with them, Max?" Her small voice carried across the yard. The gathered bikers fell silent, watching. Max felt the familiar pull of loyalty to his brothers, but also the new bonds that had begun to form over dinner just minutes ago. "1 hour, Max finally said, his voice firm. "That's all I can give you." Big Pete slapped him on the back, grinning. "That's our boy." Max walked back to the house, his boots heavy on the wooden steps. Sarah met him at the door, her arms crossed. "I have to go with them," he explained quietly. "Just for a little while." "I understand," Sarah said, though her eyes showed her uncertainty. "Just be careful." Emma wrapped her arms around his waist. "Promise you'll come back?" Max knelt down to her level, his heart twisting at the trust in her eyes. "I promise, kiddo. Save me some of that pie, okay?" As he walked back to his motorcycle, which was parked in Sarah's driveway, Max felt torn between 2 worlds. The roar of engines filled the air as his brothers started their bikes, waiting for him to join them. He swung his leg over his own machine, the familiar rumble beneath him both comforting and unsettling. With one last look at the house, where Emma and Sarah stood watching from the porch, Max kicked his bike to life. The guilt weighed heavy in his chest as he pulled away, following his brothers into the gathering darkness. Sarah stood at her kitchen window, absently stirring her coffee as she watched the sunrise paint the sky in soft pinks and oranges. The house felt emptier without Max's protective presence nearby. Even though he'd only been gone for a day, his absence left a hollow feeling in her chest. Emma sat at the kitchen table, humming quietly as she colored in her book. The scratch of crayons against paper was the only sound breaking the morning silence. "Mommy, when is Max coming back?" Emma asked, not looking up from her drawing. Sarah's heart tightened. "Soon, sweetie. He just needed to go with his friends for a little while." The phone rang, startling them both. Sarah answered it, recognizing Betty, her neighbor of 3 years. "Sarah, Betty's voice was strained. "I don't think I can watch Emma this afternoon. Something came up." Sarah frowned. Betty had never canceled before. "Is everything okay? I heard some things about you and that biker, and Dale told me about—" Betty's voice trailed off. Sarah's stomach dropped. "What did Dale tell you?" "He said that you've been lying about him, that you're unstable, and now you're running around with gang members." Betty's words came out in a rush. "I just don't think I should get involved." The line went dead before Sarah could respond. She stood there, phone in hand, feeling as if the floor had disappeared beneath her feet. Throughout the day, more signs of Dale's influence emerged. At the grocery store, Mrs. Peterson, who usually chatted with her about recipes, turned away when she saw Sarah coming. The other mothers at the park gathered their children and left shortly after Sarah and Emma arrived. Walking down Main Street, Sarah caught fragments of whispered conversations. Living with a gang member. Poor Dale. What about that sweet little girl? The isolation felt suffocating. Dale had always been good at this, turning people against her, making her doubt herself. He knew exactly how to manipulate situations, how to make himself look like the victim while painting her as the villain. Emma tugged at her hand. "Mommy, why is everyone acting weird?" Sarah looked down at her daughter's innocent face and felt a surge of determination. Emma deserved better than this, better than a mother who would let others' opinions break her spirit. At the diner, where they stopped for lunch, the waitress placed their food down without making eye contact. A group of women at the next table whispered and pointed, not even trying to be subtle. Sarah straightened her spine and lifted her chin. She remembered Max's words from their last conversation. "You're stronger than you know, Sarah. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." "Emma," Sarah said, her voice steady and clear, loud enough for the whispering women to hear. "Do you know what makes someone truly strong?" Emma shook her head, curious. "Standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. Being honest, even when others try to twist the truth." Sarah looked directly at the women at the next table. They quickly looked away, but Sarah kept speaking. "And most importantly, not letting anyone make you feel ashamed for protecting yourself and the people you love." Emma smiled, reaching across the table to hold her mother's hand. "Like how Max protected us?" "Yes, sweetie." Sarah squeezed her daughter's hand. "And like how we're going to protect each other." The whispering around them had stopped. Sarah felt lighter, stronger. Dale could spread all the rumors he wanted. He could turn the whole town against her, but he couldn't break her. Not anymore. She had Emma's love, Max's support, and most importantly, she had finally found her own voice. The rumble of Max's motorcycle broke the evening silence as he pulled into the small town. His heart felt heavy after days away with the Hells Angels. Something didn't feel right. The streets were quieter than usual, and he noticed how people quickly turned away when they saw him. He found Sarah's house dark except for a single kitchen light. When he knocked, he heard quick footsteps, and Emma's small voice asking, "Who is it?" "It's Max," he answered softly. The door opened, and Emma threw herself at him, wrapping her arms around his legs. "You came back," her voice cracked with relief. Sarah appeared in the doorway, her face drawn and tired. Dark circles under her eyes told him everything he needed to know. "Come in," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Inside, the kitchen table was covered with unopened mail and what looked like court papers. Emma clung to Max's hand as they sat down, refusing to let go. "What happened?" Max asked, his chest tightening at the sight of Sarah's trembling hands as she made coffee. "Dale's been busy," Sarah said, setting a mug in front of him. "He's been telling everyone in town that I'm an unfit mother, that I'm—" She swallowed hard. "That I'm letting Emma spend time with dangerous criminals." Max's jaw clenched. He knew she meant him and his former brothers. "The grocery store won't let me shop there anymore," Sarah continued, her voice breaking. "Emma's friends' parents won't let her come over to play, and yesterday someone threw rocks at our windows." Emma squeezed Max's hand tighter. "I'm scared," she whispered. Max felt something snap inside him. Not the violent rage he used to know, but a fierce determination. He looked at Emma's innocent face, then at Sarah's tired eyes, and knew he couldn't let this continue. "Tell me everything," he said gently. Sarah sank into a chair, her shoulders slumping. "Dale's lawyer sent papers. He's trying to get custody of Emma. He's convinced half the town that I'm living with a gang member, that I'm putting Emma in danger." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "Some people I thought were friends won't even look at me now." Max reached across the table and took her hand. "Sarah, look at me." She raised her eyes to meet his. "I won't let him do this to you, either of you." He squeezed her hand. "I know what it's like to have people judge you without knowing the truth, but I also know what it's like to find something worth fighting for." Emma moved closer to Max, resting her head against his arm. "Are you going to stay with us now?" Max looked down at her, then back at Sarah. "If that's what your mama wants, I'll stay right here. And I promise you both, Dale won't hurt you anymore. We'll fight this the right way, through the courts if we have to. I've got friends who can help, good people who'll stand up for you." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but this time they weren't from fear. "You'd do that?" "I would." Max's voice was firm. "You and Emma, you've shown me what it means to have a real family, not one built on fear or power, but on trust and love. I'm not going anywhere." For the first time in days, Sarah smiled. It was small and wavering, but it was real. Emma beamed up at Max, her faith in him unwavering since that first day she'd asked for his help outside the store. "No matter what comes," Max said, holding both their hands, "I'll protect you. That's a promise." The morning sun cast long shadows across Main Street as Sarah walked past the hardware store. She could feel the stares burning into her back. Mrs. Thompson, who usually greeted her warmly, turned away and whispered to her friend. The baker, who had always slipped Emma an extra cookie, pretended to be busy with his display. Dale's rumors had spread like wildfire through their small town. Sarah held her head high, but each cold shoulder and whispered comment cut deep. She clutched her grocery bag tighter, quickening her pace toward home. The rumble of a motorcycle made her turn. Max pulled up beside her, his leather jacket creaking as he dismounted. "Let me help you with those bags," he offered, reaching out. Sarah stepped back, her eyes fixed on his Hell's Angels vest. "Where were you these past few days?" Her voice trembled slightly. "Emma kept asking about you." Max's shoulders tensed. "The boys needed me for—" "The boys?" Sarah interrupted, her voice sharp. "The same ones who make everyone in town nervous? The ones who make people cross the street when they see them coming?" They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of unspoken words hanging between them. A couple walking nearby crossed to the other side of the street, throwing nervous glances their way. "I saw you riding with them yesterday," Sarah continued, softer now. "You looked different, like you were someone else entirely." Max ran a hand through his hair, his usual confidence wavering. "Sarah, I'm trying to balance two worlds here. Those men, they're my brothers. They've had my back when nobody else would." "And what about Emma?" Sarah's voice cracked. "What about when she needs someone to have her back? When Dale's lies have turned the whole town against us?" Max stepped closer, his voice low and intense. "I'm not the same man I was when I first joined the Angels. Back then I was angry, lost. I thought violence was the answer to everything." He gestured to the leather vest he wore. It's part of who I was, but it's not who I am anymore." Sarah studied his face, seeing the conflict in his eyes. "Then who are you, Max?" "I'm someone trying to make things right," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Someone who wants to protect you and Emma, not because I'm a Hell's Angel, but because it's the right thing to do." A group of townspeople walked past, their whispers carrying on the morning air. Sarah felt their judgment, but for the first time, she also saw how they looked at Max, not just with fear, but with uncertainty. He was changing in their eyes, just as he was changing in his own. "I understand what it's like," Sarah said softly, "to be trapped between who you were and who you want to be." She thought of her years with Dale, of all the times she'd wanted to leave but couldn't find the strength. "It's not easy to change." Max's expression softened. "No, it's not. But seeing you stand up to Dale, watching you fight for Emma, it reminds me that change is possible." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "The Angels are my past, but they don't have to define my future." Sarah felt the tension in her shoulders ease. She looked at Max and saw not the intimidating biker who had first caught her attention, but a man wrestling with his own demons, just as she was with hers. "Maybe," she said, finally allowing him to take one of her grocery bags. "We can figure out who we're meant to be together." The afternoon sun beat down on Main Street as Dale's pickup truck screeched to a halt in front of the diner. Max was sitting at an outdoor table, enjoying a coffee and watching people go about their day. The peaceful moment shattered as Dale slammed his truck door and stormed toward him. "Hey, tough guy," Dale sneered, his face red with anger. "Think you can just walk into my town and mess with my family?" Max took another sip of his coffee, his movements deliberately slow and controlled. Several townspeople stopped to watch, forming a loose circle around them. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. "They're not your family anymore, Dale," Max said quietly, his voice steady. "Sarah made her choice." Dale's hands balled into fists. "You don't know anything about us. Sarah belongs with me, and that little girl needs her father." "A father doesn't terrorize his family," Max replied, still seated. His calm demeanor seemed to infuriate Dale even more. "A real man protects them, loves them, makes them feel safe." "Who are you to lecture me about being a real man?" Dale spat, taking a step closer. "You're nothing but a criminal running with that biker gang. I know all about the Hell's Angels." The gathered crowd shifted uncomfortably. Some nodded at Dale's words, while others looked uncertain. Max could feel their eyes on him, judging, wondering. "I'm not hiding who I was," Max said, finally standing up. He towered over Dale, but made no aggressive moves. But Sarah and Emma, they deserve peace. They deserve to feel safe in their own home. Dale's face twisted with rage. I'm warning you. Stay away from them, or I'll make sure everyone in this town knows exactly what kind of monster you really are. The only monster here is the man who makes his wife and daughter live in fear, Max responded, his voice carrying clearly to the onlookers. You can threaten me all you want, Dale, but I'm not going anywhere. Dale stepped even closer, his breath hot with anger. You think you're some kind of hero? Sarah will see through you eventually, and when she does, she'll come crawling back to me. Max shook his head slowly. She's stronger than you know. Stronger than you ever gave her credit for. Dale's hand twitched, and for a moment everyone held their breath, expecting violence. But Max simply stood there, steady as a rock, his eyes never leaving Dale's face. There was no fear in his expression, no hint of the rage Dale was trying to provoke. The standoff stretched for several long seconds. Then, something in Dale seemed to deflate. He'd come looking for a fight, hoping to prove that Max was just another violent thug. Instead, he found himself face to face with a man who refused to be baited. This isn't over, Dale muttered, backing away. His eyes darted around at the watching crowd, noting their expressions. Some looked disappointed at the lack of action, but others seemed thoughtful, reassessing their assumptions about both men. Yeah, it is, Max replied quietly. You just don't know it yet. Dale turned and stalked back to his truck, his shoulders tight with frustrated anger. The crowd began to disperse as he drove away, the dust from his tires settling in the afternoon air. Max sat back down at his table, picking up his now cold coffee. His hand was steady as he lifted the cup to his lips, but inside his heart was racing. He knew this confrontation was just the beginning, but he'd made his stand. Not with fists or threats, but with a calm certainty that seemed to shake Dale more than any violence could have. The evening sun cast long shadows across Sarah's small kitchen as she sat at the wooden table, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug of tea. Max sat across from her, his large frame making the kitchen chair look tiny. The house was quiet. Emma was already asleep upstairs, her favorite stuffed bear tucked safely under her arm. I never thought I'd feel safe again, Sarah said softly, her eyes fixed on the swirling steam rising from her cup. After everything Dale put us through? Max remained silent, his weathered face showing nothing but patience and understanding. His silence gave her the courage to continue. It started small, you know? Sarah's voice trembled slightly. A harsh word here, a shove there. I kept making excuses for him, telling myself it wasn't that bad. She took a shaky breath. But then Emma was born, and things got worse. Max's hands tightened around his own mug, but his voice remained gentle. You don't have to tell me if you don't want to. No, I need to, Sarah said, finally looking up to meet his eyes. For years, I lived in fear of his temper. Every little thing could set him off. Dinner being late, Emma crying too loud, me talking to the neighbors for too long. She wiped away a tear with the back of her hand. I became so good at walking on eggshells that I forgot what it felt like to just breathe. The kitchen clock ticked steadily in the background as Max listened, his usual tough exterior softening with each word she shared. The worst part wasn't even the physical stuff, Sarah continued, her voice barely above a whisper. It was the way he made me feel worthless, like I couldn't make it on my own, like I deserved everything he did to me. Max leaned forward slightly, his presence steady and reassuring. You didn't deserve any of it, Sarah, not one bit. Sarah's eyes welled up with tears. When I saw you stand up to those men outside the store, I was terrified at first. You looked so intimidating. She managed a small smile. But then I saw how gentle you were with Emma, how you helped me up. It was like seeing what real strength looks like for the first time. Real strength isn't about throwing punches, Max said quietly. It's about getting up every morning and facing your fears, like you do. Sarah's hands trembled as she set down her mug. I spent so long being afraid of the wrong things. I was afraid of leaving, afraid of being alone. But watching you change, seeing how you're trying to be better for us. She paused, gathering her thoughts. It makes me believe that maybe I can be stronger too. You already are strong, Max said firmly. Getting away from Dale, protecting Emma, that takes more courage than anything I've ever done. Sarah felt something shift inside her chest, like a heavy weight she'd been carrying for years was finally beginning to lift. The kitchen felt warmer somehow, safer. For the first time in as long as she could remember, she felt truly heard and understood. Thank you, she whispered, for listening, for understanding. Her voice grew stronger. For showing me that people can change. Max nodded, his eyes reflecting a gentleness that seemed at odds with his rugged appearance. In that moment, Sarah saw him clearly, not as the intimidating ex-Hell's Angel who had first caught her attention, but as the man who had chosen to be better, to protect rather than harm. The rumble of motorcycles filled the evening air as dozens of Hell's Angels gathered at their usual meeting spot, an old warehouse on the outskirts of town. The sun was setting, casting long shadows through the dusty windows and painting everything in shades of orange and gold. Max stood at the front of the room, his leather jacket feeling heavier than usual on his shoulders. The familiar faces of his brothers looked back at him. Men and women he'd ridden with for years, shared battles with, bled with. The air was thick with tension and the smell of leather and motor oil. You called us here, Max, said Bear, one of the oldest members. His gray beard and weathered face showed years of hard living. What's on your mind? Max took a deep breath, his hands clenched at his sides. I need to talk to you all about something important. His voice was steady, but his heart raced. I've been thinking a lot about my place here, about who I am and who I want to be. The room fell silent. Even the usual whispers and shuffling ceased. Every eye was on Max, waiting. That woman and her little girl, Max continued, they've shown me something I didn't know I was missing, a chance at peace, at being someone different. He looked around the room, meeting the eyes of those who'd been his family for so long. I can't keep straddling two worlds. It's not fair to any of us. Bear stepped forward, his boots echoing in the quiet space. You talking about leaving the Angels? His voice was gruff, but not angry. Yes, Max said simply. I'll always be grateful for everything you've done for me. You've been my family when I had none. But I need to move on. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some nodded in understanding. Others looked disappointed. A younger member called out, Is this about that woman, Sarah? It's about who I want to be, Max replied firmly. Sarah and Emma, they've helped me see it clearly. But this decision is about me, about the man I need to become. Bear walked up to Max, studying him carefully. The old biker's eyes were sharp, taking in every detail of the man he'd known for so many years. You've changed, he said finally. We've all seen it. The way you handled that situation with those thugs, protecting that little girl and her mama, that wasn't the old Max. No, Max agreed. It wasn't. The silence stretched for a moment before Bear spoke again. You know the rules, brother. Leaving ain't easy, but it can be done clean if it's done right. Max nodded solemnly. I know. I want to do this the right way, with respect. Bear turned to address the crowd. What do you all say? Max has been true to us, fought beside us, bled with us. He's asking to walk away clean. One by one, the angels began to nod. Some stepped forward to clasp Max's hand or pull him into rough hugs. Even those who seemed disappointed couldn't deny the change they'd seen in him. You'll always be our brother, Bear said, his voice thick with emotion. But we understand. Sometimes a man's got to choose his own path. Max felt a weight lift from his shoulders as he looked at his brothers and sisters. They might not fully understand his choice, but they respected it. That was all he could ask for. Bear pulled something from his pocket. A small knife. You know what needs to be done. Max nodded, reaching for his leather jacket. It was time to remove his patches, to officially step away from the life he'd known for so long. As he began the solemn ritual, he could feel the support of his brothers and sisters around him, giving him the strength to make this final cut from his past. The morning sun cast long shadows across Main Street as Dale's truck screeched to a halt in front of the grocery store. His face was red with anger, his movements jerky and unpredictable as he stumbled out of the driver's seat. The few townspeople on the sidewalk quickly moved away, sensing trouble. Sarah stood frozen at the store entrance, groceries forgotten in her cart. Emma clutched her mother's leg, her small fingers digging into the fabric of Sarah's jeans. Max, who had been helping them load their car, stepped forward, placing himself between Dale and Sarah. You've taken everything from me. Dale's voice cracked with desperation. His usual confident swagger was gone, replaced by something more dangerous, the look of a man with nothing left to lose. My wife, my kid, my reputation in this town. Max stood steady, his shoulders relaxed but ready. This time, though, his fists remained unclenched at his sides. No, Dale, he said, his voice calm but firm. You did this to yourself? A small crowd began to gather, keeping their distance but unable to look away. Dale's eyes darted between them, seeking allies but finding none. You hurt them, Max continued, his words clear and measured. You controlled them. You made them live in fear. That's not love, Dale. That's not being a husband or a father. You don't know anything about my family. Dale lunged forward, but Max didn't move. The lack of reaction seemed to confuse Dale, making him hesitate. I know Emma cries at loud noises, Max said softly. I know Sarah checks the locks 3 times before she can sleep. I know they both flinch when someone raises their voice. He took a step closer to Dale. That's what you did to them. Zorst Peterson, the elderly owner of the flower shop, stepped forward from the crowd. He's right, Dale. We all saw it for years. We didn't say anything. We should have. Tom from the hardware store joined in. Remember when Sarah came in with those bruises? You said she fell down the stairs. We knew better. Dale's face paled as more townspeople stepped forward, each with their own story, their own witness to his cruelty. The facade he'd maintained for so long crumbled under the weight of their collective truth. These people aren't against you because of me, Max said. They're standing up because they've seen the truth. Sarah and Emma deserve better. They deserve peace. Sarah moved forward, still keeping Emma behind her, but her voice was steady. You don't own us, Dale. You never did. We're not your possession. We're people who deserve to be loved, not controlled. Dale looked around wildly, seeing only stern faces and disapproving looks. The power he'd held through fear and intimidation evaporated in the morning sun. His shoulders slumped, and for the first time, he looked small. It's over, Max said quietly. Leave them alone. Leave this town. There's nothing here for you anymore. Dale's eyes met Sarah's one last time, but instead of the fear he was used to seeing, he found strength. Without another word, He turned and walked back to his truck. The engine roared to life, and he drove away, leaving only a cloud of dust and the echo of his tires on the pavement. The crowd remained silent for a moment, as if making sure he was really gone. Then, one by one, they approached Sarah, offering quiet words of support and apology. Emma peeked out from behind her mother, her small face brightening as the tension dissolved. The evening sun cast long shadows through Sarah's kitchen window as she and Max sat at her small dining table. Emma had gone to bed early, exhausted from a day of playing in the backyard, leaving them alone with their thoughts and 2 steaming mugs of coffee. Max wrapped his weathered hands around the warm cup, his fingers tracing the rim absently. The leather jacket that had once felt like armor now hung on a hook by the door, and he sat there in a simple gray t-shirt that showed his tattoos, marks of his past that somehow seemed less threatening in this peaceful setting. "It's funny," he said, his voice soft and contemplative. "All those years on the road, I thought I was searching for freedom, but I was just running." Sarah looked up from her coffee, her eyes gentle. "Sometimes running leads you to exactly where you need to be." The kitchen clock ticked steadily in the background, marking the comfortable silence between them. Through the window, Max could see the garden Sarah and Emma had started. Young tomato plants stretched toward the sky, their green leaves reaching for sunlight. He remembered how Emma had insisted on planting sunflowers, too, and how Sarah had smiled, knowing they'd grow taller than her daughter by summer's end. "I used to wake up every morning wondering if that day would be my last," Max admitted, his shoulders relaxing as he spoke. "Always looking over my shoulder, always ready for a fight. Now—" He paused, gathering his thoughts. "Now I wake up thinking about what Emma might want for breakfast, or whether those tomatoes need watering." Sarah reached across the table, her hand resting lightly on his arm. The touch was gentle, but it sent warmth through his entire body. "You're good with her, you know. Emma, I mean. She feels safe with you." Max swallowed hard, emotion tightening his throat. "Never thought I'd have this," he said, gesturing to the peaceful kitchen, the homey touches that made the space uniquely theirs. "A place where I belong. People who—" He trailed off, unable to find the right words. "People who care about you?" Sarah finished for him, her voice barely above a whisper. He nodded, meeting her eyes. In them, he saw understanding, the kind that could only come from someone who had also known darkness and found their way to the light. "You know," Sarah said, "when Emma ran to you that day outside the store, I thought my heart would stop. But now I understand. She saw something in you that maybe you couldn't even see in yourself yet." Max smiled, remembering the tiny hand tugging at his jacket, the trust in those innocent eyes. "She saved me that day, just as much as I helped you both." The kitchen grew darker as the sun continued its descent, but neither moved to turn on the lights. In this gentle twilight, Max felt the last pieces of his old life falling away. The weight of violence and regret that had burdened him for so long seemed lighter now, replaced by something new, something that felt like hope. Sarah's hand was still on his arm, her touch anchoring him to this moment. Their eyes met across the table, and in that quiet exchange, they both understood that their broken paths had led them here for a reason. "Thank you," Max said softly, "for giving me a chance to be something different. Someone different." Sarah's smile was warm and genuine. "Thank you for showing me that change is possible, that we all deserve second chances." The autumn breeze rustled through the trees lining Main Street, carrying with it the scent of fresh-baked bread from Miller's Bakery. Sarah stood on her front porch, watching Emma play hopscotch with 2 neighborhood girls. The sight brought tears to her eyes, happy ones this time. I never thought I'd see her this carefree again, Sarah whispered as Max joined her, carrying 2 steaming cups of coffee. Max handed her a mug, his weathered hands steady and gentle. She's resilient, just like her mother. His voice was gruff but warm, like always. The town had changed in subtle ways over the past few weeks. Where there had once been whispers and sidelong glances, there were now friendly waves and genuine smiles. Mrs. Peterson from the grocery store had even started keeping Emma's favorite cookies in stock, and Mr. Jenkins at the hardware store had fixed Sarah's broken porch step free of charge. The town feels different now, Sarah said, taking a sip of her coffee. Like we finally belong. Max nodded, his eyes scanning the street out of habit. But there was no danger to watch for anymore. Just neighbors going about their daily routines, kids riding bikes, and old Mr. Thompson walking his golden retriever. I've been thinking, Max said, his fingers tapping against his coffee mug. I found a place in town, that old garage on Cedar Street, the owner's looking to sell. Sarah turned to him, her eyes bright with understanding. You're staying? If that's okay with you and Emma. Max's voice was uncertain, a rare glimpse of vulnerability showing through his tough exterior. Emma's laughter floated across the yard as she jumped from square to square. 7, 8, 9, 10, she called out, her pigtails bouncing with each hop. Emma would love that, Sarah said softly. We both would. Max set his coffee down on the porch railing. There's something else. The Angels. They're heading out tomorrow, moving on to the next town. He paused, watching Emma play. I told them I won't be going with them. Sarah reached out and touched his arm, feeling the familiar leather of his jacket. Are you sure? They've been your family for so long? They were, Max agreed. But sometimes family is what you choose, not what you're born into or what you fall into. He looked at Sarah, his eyes clear and certain. I've made my choice. The sound of motorcycles rumbled in the distance, a familiar sound that no longer brought fear to the town. 3 bikes pulled up in front of Sarah's house, their riders wearing the patches that had once defined Max's life. Tiger, the oldest of the group, dismounted first. He walked up to the porch, his boots heavy on the steps. Everything's set for tomorrow's departure, he said to Max. The boys wanted to know if you needed help moving your stuff to the new place. I appreciate it, Max replied, but I've got it handled here. Tiger nodded, understanding in his weathered face. He looked at Sarah and Emma, then back to Max. You found your peace, brother. That's all any of us really want in the end. The other riders remained on their bikes, offering respectful nods to Max. They were saying goodbye in their own way, without words or dramatic gestures. Emma waved to Tiger, who smiled and waved back. Goodbye, Mr. Tiger, she called out cheerfully. Take care, little lady, Tiger replied, his gruff voice softening. He turned back to Max. We'll hit the road at dawn. Max extended his hand, and Tiger clasped it firmly. No more words were needed between them. The thunder of motorcycles filled the air once more as the riders departed, leaving behind the man who had found something more valuable than brotherhood on the open road. The autumn breeze rustled through the trees as Max stood on Sarah's front porch, sipping his morning coffee. The wooden steps creaked beneath his feet. He'd fix those today. His toolbox sat ready beside him, a far cry from his old life of leather and chrome. Inside, he could hear Emma's cheerful voice as she helped Sarah with breakfast. The smell of pancakes drifted through the screen door, mixing with the crisp morning air. This had become their routine over the past few weeks. Simple, peaceful moments that felt more precious than anything he'd known before. Max, Emma called out, her face appearing at the door. Mommy says breakfast is ready. He smiled, his weathered features softening as they always did around her. Coming, sweetheart. In the kitchen, Sarah stood at the stove, her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail. She turned to him with a warm smile that still made his heart skip a beat. The kitchen table was set for 3, Emma's artwork decorating the walls around them. It looked like home. Felt like home. I thought we could walk Emma to school together, Sarah said, placing a stack of pancakes on the table. Then maybe you could help Mrs. Jensen with her fence. She's been asking about it. Max nodded, settling into his chair. Already got my tools ready. Figure I can help out a few folks today. Emma bounced in her seat, drowning her pancakes in syrup. Can we stop by the library after school? Miss Thompson said they got new books. Of course we can, Sarah replied, sharing a knowing look with Max. The town librarian had been one of the first to welcome them as a family, helping to smooth over the lingering whispers about Max's past. After breakfast, they walked down Main Street together, Emma skipping between them. The morning sun painted the storefronts in warm light, and familiar faces nodded in greeting. Old Mr. Peterson waved from his hardware store, where Max now helped out 3 days a week. The diner owner, Betty, called out a cheerful good morning. The transformation in the town was subtle but real. Where once there had been suspicious glances and worried whispers, now there were friendly smiles and casual conversations. Max had proven himself not through force, but through quiet acts of kindness and steady reliability. At the school gates, Emma hugged them both tightly. "See you later," she called out, running to join her friends. Sarah watched her go, leaning slightly against Max's solid presence. "Sometimes I still can't believe how different everything is," she said softly. Max wrapped an arm around her shoulders, understanding in his eyes. "Good different?" "The best different," she replied, reaching up to touch his cheek. "You know, Mrs. Jensen isn't the only one who needs help today. The community center's having that cleanup day we talked about." "I'll head over there after I finish the fence," Max said, already planning his day. He'd found a new purpose in these simple tasks, in being the kind of man who built things up instead of tearing them down. They walked back through town together, stopping to chat with neighbors and shopkeepers. Sarah headed to her new job at the local cafe, while Max gathered his tools for Mrs. Jensen's fence. The morning sun warmed his back as he worked, and he could hear the familiar sounds of the town coming to life around him. Children laughing, cars passing, people calling out greetings. This was his life now, not the roar of motorcycles or the tension of constant vigilance, but the quiet satisfaction of honest work and genuine connections. Each nail he hammered, each fence he mended felt like another step toward something real and lasting. The autumn breeze carried the scent of cotton candy and caramel apples through the town square. Colorful banners fluttered overhead, and the sound of children's laughter mixed with live music from the local band. Max stood tall beside Sarah, his hand resting gently on her shoulder as they watched Emma bounce excitedly in front of a face-painting booth. "Mommy, can I get a butterfly?" Emma's eyes sparkled with hope as she pointed to the design chart. Sarah smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Of course, sweetheart." Max watched as the face painter transformed Emma's cheek into a delicate purple and blue butterfly. The little girl could hardly contain her excitement, squirming in her seat. It was hard to believe this was the same frightened child who had tugged on his leather jacket just 6 months ago. The festival buzzed with life around them. Townspeople nodded warmly as they passed, a far cry from the suspicious glances Max had grown used to in his early days here. Even old Mrs. Thompson, who had once clutched her purse tighter at the sight of him, now waved cheerfully from her booth selling homemade pies. "All done," the face painter announced, holding up a mirror for Emma. "I love it!" Emma jumped up, wrapping her arms around Max's legs. "Do you like it?" Max knelt down, pretending to study the artwork carefully. I think this butterfly picked the perfect face to land on. Emma giggled, the sound pure and light, making Sarah's eyes water. She remembered countless nights of muffled tears and whispered promises that things would get better. Now, watching her daughter's unbridled joy, those dark times felt like a distant memory. They made their way through the festival, stopping at various booths. Max won Emma a stuffed penguin at the ring toss, and Sarah couldn't help but smile at how far he'd come from the gruff biker who'd defended them that day. His leather jacket had been replaced with a soft flannel shirt, and the hardness in his eyes had melted into warmth. At the picnic tables near the town gazebo, they sat down with plates of festival food. Emma's face was sticky with cotton candy, and Sarah dabbed at it with a napkin, earning a playful protest. "Remember when you wouldn't let me anywhere near her?" Max asked softly, his voice holding no judgment, just wonder at how much had changed. Sarah reached across the table, squeezing his hand. "And now I can't imagine her life without you in it." The festival lights began twinkling as the sun lowered in the sky. Families gathered on blankets spread across the town green, waiting for the evening's fireworks display. Max spread their checkered blanket under an old oak tree, and Emma settled between them, clutching her new penguin. "Look at the sky, Mommy." Emma pointed to where the sun was painting the clouds in brilliant shades of pink and orange. Sarah leaned into Max's solid presence beside her, feeling the steady rise and fall of his chest. The man who had once lived for the roar of motorcycles and the thrill of danger now found his peace in these quiet moments with them. They stood together as the last rays of sunlight gilded the town in golden light. Emma held both their hands, swinging them gently as she hummed along with the distant music. The sunset painted their silhouettes against the darkening sky, three figures who had found in each other what they'd been searching for all along. "This is what home feels like," Max murmured, his voice thick with emotion. Sarah squeezed his hand, understanding everything those simple words contained. They had all found their sanctuary, not in a place, but in each other. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story, and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.